Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Mark Elrich defeated David Blair by only 80 votes in the Democratic primary. Now he must face term limit champion Robin Ficker and independent candidate Nancy Florine. What does this mean for county residents? Can Ben Jellison and the progressive left defeat Larry Hogan in his brand of good government republicanism? And why is there so much opposition to the nomination of Montgomery County native Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Dean of Democratic Punditry, Sam Statland, Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, Maryland Young Republican National Committeeman, Evan Young, and business strategist and political consultant, Rich Parsons. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. In the Democratic primary race for Montgomery County Executive, the vote was so close between businessman David Blair and term-limited council member Mark Elrich that the Board of Election was required to count all of the absentee and provisional ballots. After 3 weeks of speculation, Mr. Elrich defeated Mr. Blair by a mere 80 votes. Mark Uncapher, you were hoping for an Elrich versus Robin Ficker race. Is this the race that Republicans think you can win, and why?
It's certainly a study in contrast between the two of them. But look, Mark Elrich got about 5% of the total Montgomery County vote. That's what it is. There are over 700,000 voters, and only a fraction participated in the Democratic primary. So I say, why not let all Montgomery County voters have a say on who's going to be their county executive?
Well, that's very, very generous of you, Mark. But can you win?
I think it's going to be an interesting challenge and an interesting opportunity. But I think with Nancy Florine dividing the Democratic vote, and you look at the voters who supported term limits, who supported the Ficker initiative 2 years ago, I think Robin Ficker should not be underestimated.
All right, Sam, let's talk about this. Political intrigue was piqued on Wednesday when another term-limited council member, Nancy Florine, who did not run in the Democratic primary, declared her intention to run in the general election as an independent because the business interests in Montgomery County are scared to death of Mark Elrich. Can she win?
They may be scared to death, but this is deja vu. I've been through this many times, and I will tell you and predict that Mark is going to win this election. Nancy's got a really tough road. First of all, she has to have lots of paid volunteers to get 7,200 signatures, and I'm sure there'll be lots of paid people out there, not local people. And secondly, the Democratic establishment, from the indications I'm seeing, are backing Mark. That means an awful lot in a predominantly Democratic county. And thirdly, I'm really disappointed that Nancy's switching parties. It's just terrible. It's like putting a knife in my chest.
Well, I think it's pretty smart of her not to get caught and lost in the scrum that was the Democratic primary, where there were 8 candidates and nobody could gain any traction. I think this is brilliant politics on her part.
I just think that a whole lifetime of being a successful politician and a Democrat in the county goes down the tubes by this silly move.
Look, you're not going to care if Nancy's elected instead of Robin Ficker. You'll be just delighted that she ran as an independent.
No, I want a Democrat. I am a big D Democrat.
Well, changing her registration temporarily doesn't make her a strong independent.
Let me just jump in here because I love this sudden, very selective application of Sam's worry about this. I notice a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters never seem to complain when he switched from independent to Democrat, then back to independent, then to Democrat. Then when he lost the nomination fight, he immediately switched back to independent. No one seemed to mind then. Nobody questions Bernie Sanders' progressive credentials. Look, I view this race a little bit differently. I don't think Robin Ficker has much of a shot here. I think he's kind of a gadfly-esque kind of candidate. I think he's only going to hold on to a very small fringe of this vote. I think you've got almost the same dynamic on the Democratic side now. And we still have a big question about the recount. I think David Blair's people are talking about asking for a recount. So I don't think we know how that's going to shape up, but I think there's plenty of room in the middle for a moderate, progressive Democrat to do much better than you think. And we haven't been in this situation before. This is new territory for Montgomery County.
Let's go back to
no, we've never had
Kramer Potter.
We've never had such polarization of the two nominees in a moderate run centrist campaign.
What you also haven't had is so much dissatisfaction with the people who are running for office.
Right.
I mean, we had a historic shift when Robin Ficker was successful in getting term limits passed. That should send a message to the county council
anybody's race.
That people are upset about their government.
And 70%, over 70%, didn't vote for term limits by accident. And it wasn't to give Councilmember Elrich a promotion to Supreme Leader Elrich. The worst thing the county could do is elect Mark Elrich as county executive. The last two Republicans to run for this office got about 32%. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. If Robin could maintain that 32%, 32, 34%, it splits the Democrat vote between the rest of the other.
But Mark, isn't this the problem that you have with Robin? Is that there's a lot of negatives associated with Robin.
He is a lightning rod candidate. The strength to that is there is a very passionate group of people. We saw that with the term limits. Evan Pick is absolutely right on with the numbers. Robin goes into this with a very, very strong base that should not be underestimated.
The commonality between Robin and Mark is that both of them are viewed as being non-establishment. And that goes right to what you're saying, which I think is a huge advantage. And Mark, for some reason, historically, has had a very solid hardcore that comes out and actually works for him and covers him.
But Sam, 70% of the Democrats who voted in the primary just chose not to vote for him. And as Mark said, 5% of the electorate's been heard from. I think this whole incident is a great walking advertisement for open primaries. I think that would result in a lot better results with a much better mandate that actually reflects where the voters are. The voters have not been heard. I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out, depending on how the recount goes. But I think voters should have a wide open choice. I don't see anything wrong with what Nancy Florine has done. I think it's good for voters to have good choices from left, right, and center, and they can make an informed choice. I'm quite sure they will. I say game on. It's going to be a fun one to watch.
It's going to be a fun one, but I also think
I never supported Bernie either.
But I also think I think the Democrats shouldn't overlook Robin Ficker. I mean, he's got a strong message that he can get out there.
How many times has he run? And how many times has he ever gotten more than 10% on the ballot?
Ever.
Actually, he's run as an independent for county executive. He's got
he's
more against a Republican. All that's true.
Too late now.
He's got a perennial candidate, and I don't think he's going to get out of single digits. So it's not a question
of splitting it. He's got a story
in the general election. I don't think he's going to get out of single digits.
About term limits and how he successfully championed and fought for term limits that nobody thought would ever happen.
A lot of people got behind that term limit referendum, including a lot of Democrats who were fed up with how some of the people on the council were conducting themselves.
And that's two of those people are now running for county executive.
And Nancy's going to be viewed as continuing that path.
No, because she wasn't part of that.
That's the problem for both Mark and Nancy.
No, Mark has always been viewed as an outsider. Always.
And his colleague, he's the only member of the county council ever not to be chosen as council president by his colleagues after serving that long.
But
he's
only
not,
because
he's not the
Rod
consensus choice
borrow
of
and stole
the
to get the presidency.
Sam, to the person who only pays attention to were you a council member, they're gonna see Mark Elrich as being part of the problem that has existed in this county for the last 30 years.
If you look at specifically, Sam, if you look at when you say that, it gets specific. What's the problem to voters? The property tax increases. Yes, he was part of that problem. Nancy actually wasn't. The congestion problems. Mark opposed the ICC. He opposed Montrose Parkway. He's been against every major transportation improvement we've had. Nancy's got a different record. And Robin Ficker is actually better on transportation issues. There's going to be a lot of debate over substance, over policy. These candidates are very strikingly different, and I think it's great to have voters have a full choice. If they want to go with Mark Elrich, then that's the direction
we got to go.
Let's give everybody a chance to be heard.
We got about 30 seconds. Let's wrap this up.
Less than a 30% voter turnout. And in the general, it's going to also be abysmal.
I think
that Mark's advantage is his hardcore. And I don't think the voters these days, I hope we get better than 35.
I want to wrap
than
this up. Mark, you're going to get the last word. What's the path to victory for Robin Ficker?
We're going to have a strong top of the ticket with Larry Hogan, and I think a lot of Democrats will be staying home because of the Ben Jealous. I think Nancy Florine is a formidable candidate.
Well, you know what, Mark, I like you gave me the perfect segue into our next topic, because we're going to talk about the governor's race. And in a crowded multi-candidate field, former NAACP head Ben Jealous emerged and won the Democratic nomination for governor and the opportunity to challenge popular incumbent governor, Republican Larry Hogan. So, Rich, according to Josh Kurtz, writing in Maryland Matters, there's some Maryland Democrats wondering whether Ben Jealous was the strongest candidate to take on Larry Hogan.
Well, I think his very strong showing in the primary maybe is causing some people to rethink that. And the fact that I've heard him speak recently, and I think he's come a long way since the beginning of this campaign, I think he's going to actually do better than I even initially thought. I'll be on the table here, cards on the table. I supported Rashawn Baker. I thought he was better as a general election candidate, but Ben Jealous really didn't just win, but won big in the primary, and I think he's going to be more formidable than Republicans may have thought initially. I think
he's got that progressive label.
He's going to get people out, and he's able to really inspire people. I've heard him speak, and he's pretty compelling. So I think jury's out on that question.
I think in Montgomery County,
yeah,
the voters that come out for him are Mark voters, which I think is another big advantage.
He's broader than Mark. He's got a broader appeal than Mark.
I want to go to Evan first, and we'll come back to you on that, Sam. So, Evan, incumbent Governor Larry Hogan seems to be running hard, even though the early polls has him ahead of his opponent. Is he afraid of Ben Jealous and Ben Jealous striking lightning in a bottle and getting those Democratic voters out to the polls?
I don't think he's afraid. I think the worst thing you could do is not be running hard, because the Maryland Democrat Party, they are going to be running hard against Governor Hogan. That's already started. We've seen that already. So, I mean, anything other than Governor Hogan coming out the gates running hard would be a mistake. Yes, he's very popular, most popular governor in the country. Does not change the fact that we are still vastly outnumbered when it comes to voter registration in the state. So I don't think Ben Jealous is going to be governor. I think a lot of Democrats are going to vote for Governor Hogan. But complacency and not taking him serious is what's going to make a governor jealous.
I want to go to Mark first. Mark, you know Montgomery County numbers as well as anybody. What was the percentage of Democratic voters that Governor Hogan got in the last election?
Well, the polls are showing that about a quarter of Democrats across the board in both
Montgomery County,
in Montgomery as well as elsewhere in the state, are leaning towards Hogan. I think that in independents, the majority of them are going for it. I think that puts Larry Hogan in the mid-40 range in Montgomery County.
Except there's a wild card on the table here, and that has to do with the President of the United States is profoundly unpopular in this state, and that is in every poll and every bit of evidence that we see on the ground. I think it is going to drive up Democratic turnout. It's certainly driving the enthusiasm of the Democratic base at this point, a lot more than the Republican base. And I think if anyone has the capacity to completely embarrass himself and our country and drive Democratic turnout even further, it's Donald J. Trump. So I think there is a chance here that the Democrats might get more motivated, and the data seem to show Democratic voters are very motivated this election. And I think you are going to see an increase in turnout, as we've seen in this primary.
I don't think the data captures what the Republicans are doing, because they're not as vocal and demonstrative.
But I've seen wave elections. If it is a true wave election,
I hope trying to tie Governor Hogan to Donald Trump is the Democrat strategy, because they've been trying that for 2 years now, and he's still the most popular governor in the country. So please, Democrats, try that until November.
My point is, sometimes in a wave election, even if you completely separate yourself, it's still enough of a turnout edge and a registration edge that even if the Republican completely separates, they still lose, and that might happen.
So I think that you've got two elections here. I think you had the primary, which was a Democratic insider race election, and now you've got the general election with a very popular Republican governor. And I think that combination, plus Mr. Jealous's progressiveness, is going to change who comes out and votes. You may well get a higher turnout of progressive Democrats and defeat Hogan.
Mark.
The primary for Democrats in Montgomery County is heavily skewed towards Tacoma Park. When you get to a general election, it's a much broader electorate. It's more moderates and more independents, and obviously Republicans and independents can vote. The dynamic is very different, and I think it gives a pathway to victory both for Hogan in terms of getting a much more competitive number here in Montgomery County, but I think it also is a challenge for Mark Elrich in this county to be able to win. It's a different electorate. Don't equate that primary vote with the general election.
I agree with you. It's a different electorate. I think Mark pulls. Listen, when you look at the independents within Montgomery County, who are they? A lot of them are federal and state employees that are worried about Hatch, and they're heavily Democratic.
Actually, the numbers don't support that. There are people who made a conscious decision not to be a Democrat,
and they're also younger voters. A lot of the younger millennial and below voters, the new registrants, a lot of them are registering through MVA, and they're not choosing a party because, frankly, they don't realize we're a closed primary state.
Out of 80-some thousand MVA mistakes, registrations, I think in Montgomery County it was like 35. Was it 3,500? Maybe I'm reverting. 35 to 5,300 actually were MVA people who really voted.
We're gonna have
such a drop off.
We're gonna have to wrap it up.
And where were the ladies, by the way?
We're gonna have to wrap it up, Sam, and we'll find out more as we progress to November. When we come back from this short break, why is Bethesda native Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court drawing so much opposition? Stay tuned. And welcome back. Monday night, President Donald Trump nominated Montgomery County native and Georgetown Prep graduate Brett Kavanaugh to serve as a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States, replacing the retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy. Kavanaugh, who currently serves on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, has an impressive background. In addition to his 12 years in the Court of Appeals, Kavanaugh has worked in the White House counsel's office for President Bush. He worked for Special Prosecutor Ken Starr in the investigation of Bill Clinton, and earlier he even clerked for Justice Kennedy. Not to mention that he graduated first in his class from Yale Law School. Wow, what a resume. Sam, Kavanaugh, by most accounts, has a brilliant judicial mind. So why is his nomination being opposed by so many Democrats?
Because when you talk to people that have worked with him, and you look at some of his decisions, and how he actually manages within the court on his decisions, what you see is too much politics in his decision making. That's the biggest deficit against it. And that's all you got to do is start talking Democrat versus Republican, and you take it to the House, and you got a war between the House and within the Senate, and he gets a lot of stuff thrown at him, and then he gets elected.
I'm glad you.
I mean, he's just
you must have spent a lot of time reading all 300 opinions to come up with.
The protesters were there
to come up with that one.
No matter who the nominee
All right, so
was.
Mark, one reporter at the Washington Post referred to Kavanaugh as the Forrest Gump of Republican lawyers, but wouldn't any Republican nominee be met with the same vitriolic opposition just because he's a Republican?
I think they had signs ready to oppose every single potential nominee on Monday night, and then had to pull up the Kavanaugh. There wasn't any nominee who would have satisfied the anti-Trump voters on Monday night because of the fact that this is a very partisan choice, a partisan decision about the Supreme Court in America, and it divides the country. Kavanaugh meets the criteria that we've historically had for judges in terms of qualification without any question.
Well, but that doesn't mean he's not going to be opposed.
Well,
Rich.
Again, it's part of this process that's causing all this angst on the Democratic side, on the moderate side, and I think the real concern is all of these selections were pre-screened by the Federalist Society and others with the litmus test that everybody knows on abortion rights,
your side
gay
does
rights,
the same thing.
So
come on, Rich. You think Elena
you asked
Kagan,
why it's controversial.
You think Elena Kagan
Casey, can I answer?
Different?
You asked why it's controversial, and the answer is most Americans actually think there is a right to marriage regardless of your sexual orientation. Most Americans do believe a woman has a fundamental right to choose. So these issues are not reflected in his decisions, and that's why it's controversial.
Evan, wrap it up for us.
Forrest Gump said, You never know what you're going to get in the box of chocolates. With Democrats, you do know what you're going to get, and no matter who this nominee was, they're going to do the same whimpering, gloom and doom routine.
Not if he was pro-choice.
All right. Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. Nearly 3 weeks ago, a lone gunman with a grudge targeted those that worked at the Annapolis newspaper, the Capital Gazette, killing 5 and wounding several others. In the aftermath, it was learned that Gerald Ramos had a long-standing grudge against the newspaper, and for rather unspecific reasons. But whatever his reasons, no words can adequately describe the horrific nature of his wanton violent act. There is little to be said other than to honor those that perished: Rob Hyacin, Wendy Winters, Gerald Fishman, John McNamara, and Rebecca Smith. May God welcome them into his presence. Now with their own parting shots, Sam Statland.
Well, I'm going to have to piggyback with you. I think this was an absolutely terrible, terrible thing to have somebody go into a room, a press room, into a newspaper and shoot people this way and deprive their families of their loved ones.
Thank you, Sam. Now with his parting shot, Mark Uncapher.
Well, thank you, Casey. You know, in the governor's race here in Maryland, over 40 Democrats, some of them very senior Democrats, 40 former party chairmen, former speakers of the House of Delegates, have come out and endorsed Larry Hogan. And it's an interesting contrast. We talked about the food fight that's going on, the very partisan back and forth on the Supreme Court nomination. It's a reminder, all these people supporting the governor, just how he's governed on an even keel, on a balanced basis that brings all Marylanders together.
Thank you, Mark. Evan Young, your parting shot.
So I was reading in the 7th State website recently that they said it's not the year of the woman in Montgomery County because David Trone beat Aruna Miller. So in the first paragraph, they said the congressional delegation would be all male. Seem to forget there's an election in November still to come where Ami Hober is running for Congress in the 6th District against David Trone. So everyone that likes to pretend that they're out there championing women until there's an R next to that woman's name, put some action where your virtue signaling usually is, and go vote for Ami Hober in November.
Thank you, Evan. Rich Parsons, your parting shot.
I'm going to get away from politics a little bit because today, this morning, I was honored to be with the Gaithersburg-Germantown Chamber of Commerce as they really recognized some people in our community that get ignored too often. That's our first responders, our police, our fire, rescue, our public safety professionals and volunteers who keep this community safe. And it's a great reminder of the sacrifices that they and their families make for us. And I'd just like to give a shout out and salute the work that they do to keep all of us a safe and thriving community that we are. My hat's off to all our first responders and public safety professionals and volunteers out there. Great job.
Thank you, Rich. Now, next week, the Washington area is honored to have the All-Star Game at Nationals Park for the first time in many, many years, probably the first time even in my lifetime. So as we have all these visitors coming into our nation's capital, let us enjoy the fact that we have a baseball team in Washington that is supportive of the region. You know, baseball has a unique place in the sports histories of most people. It's called America's pastime. It's a fun game to watch, and I hope everyone has a good time and enjoys going out to Nationals Park for the All-Star Game. And for 21 this week, we're going to enjoy more bickering and more arguing as the summer gets heated and as we approach the election season. So I want to thank the panel for being here. I want to thank the viewers for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.